Hello YouTube, I'm Arend Peter. This is the last video in a series where I try to answer the general question of how to be informed. In the beginning I mentioned that it feels like there's a ton of big questions floating out there and I feel pressured to be informed on all of them. From there, we established that the blockers to becoming informed were mainly mental blockers, but we're afraid to admit that to ourselves. In particular, we need to get comfortable with the reality that we don't know, we don't care, and we're intimidated. Throughout the series, we worked to resolve each one. We resolved the intimidation blocker by setting up clear priorities and only focusing on what's important. The selfishness blocker turned out not to be an issue, because we maintained as a base assumption with each addition to our priorities. And once we reached the big picture, we could see that caring for society is just an extension of caring for ourselves. Lastly, once we've acknowledged our ignorance and thought through our priorities, we also realized that it's not difficult to shift our lifestyle in order to slowly reduce our ignorance over time. I want to avoid being too dogmatic about the mind map representation. This is intuitive for me, but you might come up with something that aligns better with how you view your priorities. No matter how you break it down, in the end you'll have a better sense of what you do and don't know. And that's the part that's vital for the next topic I'll be discussing. Back in the beginning of the series, I described the analogy of a group of blind people trying to examine an elephant. They naturally each had different answers because they were examining different parts, and that conflict caused fights to arise because each was confident that they had all the information. In this scenario, we can think of the conclusions that each blind person reached as the set of priorities that they developed based on the information available to them. In the real world, I feel differences in priorities usually form the core of debates. How often do you hear arguments along the lines of, how can you prioritize issue X when issue Y is clearly more important? In these debates, our set of priorities is also our personal bias, and when you're not able to acknowledge your own ignorance, then you lose the ability to distinguish between bias and actual truth. Frequently, the tragic outcome of these debates is that we end up retreating to echo chambers where we don't have to worry about seeing anything other than our own version of the truth. This problem is getting worse in the internet age. With access to unlimited amounts of information, it becomes super easy to pick out information which supports our views. The problem is that even by strategically filtering based on our priorities, adding information will mostly only grow our perspective rather than significantly adjust the structure. Just like there's a true elephant in the story, but everyone has their bias on what the elephant is, I also think there's an ultimate set of true priorities, and each of us only has part of the truth. If we all knew all there was to know, then I think we'd all agree on everything. So when I end up in those conversations with opposing viewpoints, I'm actually really excited. The echo chambers are the environments that feel frustrating to me. Through understanding the reasoning behind other people's priorities, I can adjust my own priorities to shift my bias closer to the truth. But that's only possible if I'm able to acknowledge that I'm ignorant and I can recognize my current priorities as a bias rather than the actual truth. So I guess it's impossible to ever become fully informed. But by always seeking to improve our priorities, we at least know that we're always getting closer, and I think that's the best we can do. So I'm going to end this video the same way I've ended many of the previous videos. I encourage you to share your own perspective with me so that I can become less biased in my own perspective. This can be done through leaving a comment or sharing your own set of priorities through the link in the description. Thank you so much for sticking with this series all the way to the end. I really appreciate it and I really hope you found it useful. I look forward to seeing you next time. For the final additional resources, I'm recommending a CGP Grey video called This Video Will Make You Angry. It covers how groups form echo chambers on the internet and slowly become more angry with each other. But I imagine I'll be adding a lot more to this description, even after the series is released, whenever I think of something I think could be helpful. I'll probably just go ahead and tack on this last video to have it out there on the list.